From a filter in front of your lens to the image editor on your computer, there are many places in the image production process where you can control how your image is rendered. Somewhere in the middle of that is your camera. And if you're a JPEG shooter, the camera is the only place where adjustments to color, contrast, and so forth will have access to the full sensor data. Now, the solution to this, at least for Canon cameras, are Picture Styles. They provide you, the user, with control over how color, contrast, and sharpening are handled and modified in both the camera and in Canon's Digital Photo Professional for both pictures and at least some videos. Now, I'll be honest, when I started working on this little project, I thought this would be a simple, quick, one-off video. After all, picture styles are pretty simple, pretty basic. They're fundamental, right? Well, as it turned out, as I worked through all the details, I realized there's actually quite a lot here. Some of it certainly is basic, and some of it is incredibly complex and almost arguably very niche. And ultimately, it was all more than I wanted to stuff into a single video. So as such, this is part one of a 5-part series looking at Canon's picture styles. Now, in this video, we're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about what picture styles are, we're going to talk about who needs to care about them, and then we're going to look at what Canon's built-in or provided picture styles do to an image, at least from a photo mode perspective. In part 2, we'll look at how you change picture styles on your camera. In part 3, we'll look at how you edit and customize the picture styles on your camera. In part 4, we'll look at the difference between photo and video mode and when and where you can use picture styles in your videos. And finally, in the last part, we'll take a look at Canon's Picture Style Editor software, which allows you to create your own picture styles, complete with full control over how colors are rendered, tone curves, contrast curves, the whole 9 yards. We'll also look at how to take that picture style and upload it to your camera so you can actually use it in the field. But to start with, let's address that first question. What is a picture style? Well, put simply, a picture style is the formula that Canon cameras use to create an image, to convert the light they capture into the picture that you see. Now, if you're familiar with Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, in some respects, picture styles are similar to the profile section that you have in the basic module in Develop. But they're deeper than that, and they include more functionality than that, just what Adobe has in a DNG profile. Specifically, picture styles control not just how color will be rendered, but also the way the image will be sharpened in the camera, as well as contrast curves and the whole 9 yards. Further, some of these settings can be adjusted in camera while others can't. You just have to choose a different picture style. Now, knowing what they are, the next question is who needs to care about them and when? Well, the short answer to that is everybody needs to care about picture styles at least a little bit. Though the real detail of it is how much you have to care. That depends on whether you shoot in RAW or in JPEG and whether you're interested in processing your image in post, regardless of whether you shoot in RAW or JPEG, although RAW kind of implies that. Now, for the RAW shooter, picture styles have no impact on the actual image information that's captured and stored in the file. They are all post-processing metadata. However, they do affect the rendering of the live image that you see on your mirrorless camera, the live and review histograms that are provided by the camera, and the embedded and preview images that the camera uses when you actually go to review an image to see if it's what you wanted. Additionally, if you use Canon's Digital Photo Professional software to process your RAW files, then it uses the picture style you selected in camera as the default picture style or the basis for the processing that it does. Now, of course, since we're talking about RAW files, you can change that at any time in Digital Photo Professional, and it doesn't have any impact on image quality. And if you're using third-party software like Lightroom or Capture One, it usually just ignores the picture style metadata. Now, on the other hand, if you are a JPEG or HEIC shooter, Picture Styles are the first place that you have any real creative control over the color and sharpening in your images. And they're also the last place where you have that control while still working with the full, unlossy compressed image data that your sensor captures. Yes, sure, you can always reprocess JPEG files later. However, being that they're an 8-bit lossy compressed image, they are already discarding a lot of image information, and further processing means potentially throwing away even more of the information that's going on, so second generation losses. The situation is also similar if you are shooting in HEIC format, which is what you're going to be shooting when you are shooting in HDR-PQ mode. However, in this case, there's some other limitations, such as the fact that you won't be able to select the auto or user-defined picture styles in HDR-PQ mode. So with those two questions out of the way, let's take a moment and look at each of the predefined picture styles and what they do to an image. Now, for the sake of comparisons, I'm going to show versions of a color check card and a few sample images that I've pulled from my archives. Then I'm going to show these alongside, using the picture style, and then I'm going to show it alongside the standard picture style. That's going to be kind of our reference. Now, I've also uploaded all of the sample images to an article on my website that's linked in the video description. So if you're interested in checking out them, examining them more closely, or doing it on your own time, instead of trying to have to pause and skip through frames or anything like that, you can just go download some JPEGs of them and take a look. Now, the first picture style that we have to look at is auto. Now, Canon says in the manual and then their documentation that this will adjust the color tone automatically to suit the scene, and that it should provide vivid colors for blue skies and greenery and sunsets, particularly in nature, outdoor, and sunset scenes. Now, in the case of our test image with the color check card, we can see that in this specific situation, there's virtually no difference between auto and the standard picture style. They both are basically the same. However, that's not always the case. In this tiger image, the grass is slightly brighter and the shadows on the tiger's leg are also as well. In this desert roads image, the sky is bluer in auto, and the same is actually true for the Yosemite Valley sunset image, though the difference here is somewhat less than in the desert road. Virtually, again, the sunrise or the desert sunrise image is virtually identical with both auto and standard, showing that it doesn't always make the same changes. Now, while auto will never do anything egregious, like, say, turn a blue sky red, what it will do definitely varies from image to image and situation to situation, and that's where my real problem with auto lies. Personally, I'm not a fan of uncertainty in my photography. I want to know what I can expect once I get used to something, and be able to judge as I'm looking at a scene that, oh, this is going to be that. Now, Canon provides us no technical information about what exactly auto does or how exactly it figures things out. And that leads to an awful lot of uncertainty in using the auto setting. So personally, I don't use it. And I don't generally recommend using it if you care about knowing what the image is going to end up looking like. Now, that said, auto is the default picture style, and as far as I can tell, it's the only picture style the camera uses when it's set to scene intelligent auto. Now, the next picture style is standard, and standard used to be Canon's default picture style, and it's described by Canon as being vivid, sharp, and crisp, and generally good for most scenes. It's also our reference image, so there's not a whole lot that I'm going to compare it to here. In general, if you don't know what picture style you want or should use in a given situation, standard is usually a safe bet. Moreover, it doesn't do anything fancy like auto does and change from picture to picture or scene to scene or anything like that. So at a minimum, even if it's not perfectly perfect in every situation, it's at least predictable in every situation. Now, our third picture style option is portrait, and by default, portrait uses less sharpening and also aims to create pleasing skin tones. Now, comparing portrait and standard, we can immediately see a difference in the brown or skin tone swatches on the test target, along with the large RGB swatches, and in the color check card, the blue, cyan, and green swatches also show noticeable shifts, though maybe not in the direction that you might have expected for a portrait-oriented skin or format. In our tiger sample image, the portrait mode makes the grass greener while making the orange fur less saturated. The same is also the case for the desert road scene, where the sky and plants are more saturated in the portrait version than in standard. And in all the rest of the images, which have more warm tones, the portrait style tends to desaturate those warm oranges and yellows pretty consistently. Now, in the portrait image, I definitely like the less vivid or saturated rendering that the portrait style gives over standard, though it doesn't really work for me in the landscapes. So again, this is one of those things that you have to kind of choose the right thing for the right situation. Now, the landscape picture style, Canon says, and focuses on increasing the vibrance of blues and greens while also producing a sharp image. Now, as expected from the description, when you compare standard, the blues and greens are more saturated, while the reds and browns do become more yellow, or the overall color tone becomes warmer. In fact, on the whole, neutral grays and whites do tend to shift towards being more of a warm color in the landscape picture style. In the tiger image, landscape mode pushes the brightness of the shadows and the greens towards yellow-green. In all of the landscape shots, the skies are bluer, and the warm tones from the sunset and sunrise shots are more saturated compared to standard. Finally, in the portrait sample, landscape adds a ton of saturation to the yellow of the skin tones, which I don't find particularly pleasing in a portrait image, and while this is not what the picture style is really intended for. Our next picture style is fine detail, and by default at least, this is optimized for sharpening fine details and textures as opposed to coarser details. Now, interestingly, this also seems to have its own color transformation that's slightly different from all the other picture styles as well. While the colors are similar to standard, there are clearly areas where there is less contrast, and brighter tones are not as bright. Additionally, there are some subtle shifts in color aside from just luminance. For example, pay a close attention to the orange-yellow and yellow-green and purple swatches in the color test target. Now, looking at the sample images in the tiger shot, fine detail darkens highlight areas compared to standard and has less contrast. There's also clearly less sharpening being applied as advertised. In the desert road image, you can see a significant change in the lighter blue area in the sky, likely due to that brightness and contrast reduction. In the sunrise log desert image, there is a little more warmth in the log, and the sky is more contrasty when compared to standard. And finally, in the Yosemite Valley shot, again, the biggest difference is in the sky and the sharpening of the rocks. Now, that brings me to neutral and faithful, and I'm kind of lumping these together because they try to be the same thing, but they're not quite the same. Both of these profiles are intended for images that will have post-processing done to them, and so they try to minimize performing any sharpening, for example, in any major contrast curves. Now, that said, so long as we're talking about shooting in JPEG here, lots of post-processing is probably not the best idea either if you're looking for optimum image quality, but it is something you may do. Now, both of these picture styles produce a more subdued color and lower contrast than the more vibrant options we've already seen. The difference between the two is that faithful is supposed to try to reproduce the colors as seen under 5200 Kelvin daylight conditions, and neutral reproduces the color under the white balance that you have the camera set to. Now, compared to standard, both of these are much less contrasty and saturated, and compared to each other, there's also differences, though the differences are not as strong as you'd see from comparing them to any of the other modes. In the tiger test image, the light fur behind the head is slightly warmer or saturated and faithful compared to neutral. In the desert road image, the lower sky is bluer in the faithful image compared to neutral. In the desert sunrise log image, the sky is more contrasty and there's more warmth in both the sky and the log in faithful. And the same is actually true for the Yosemite Valley image as well. Finally, in the portrait image, faithful renders the skin slightly warmer and has slightly more contrast than it does in neutral. Now, that said, the question that has plagued me with these since I first picked up a Canon camera is, which of these are more correct? And the answer to that is, I don't really know. I went and looked through my archive of images, and in over almost 20 years of shooting with Canon cameras, I've apparently shot in both modes at different times, going back and forth, with obviously no particular rhyme or reason. Now, I do shoot RAW, so the actual processing that I do in post is completely different from what the camera is doing here, so the variation isn't as relevant to me as it might be to others. Now, the final picture style that we have to look at is monochrome, and the monochrome picture style converts your images to black and white. Moreover, you can add effects in that conversion process using either the built-in color filtering and or built-in tone effects to process or to mirror the filters that would be used in black and white photography or the processes that would be sort of used in the long-term development of film. So you have options of using a yellow, orange, red, or green filter and doing sepia, blue, purple, and green tone post-conversion effects. Now, one thing to be aware of is that if you use the monochrome picture style and you are shooting in JPEG or HEIF, you cannot reverse the conversion that happens and make the black and white image color again. Now, if you're shooting in RAW, the change to from monochrome to color is no problem because the raw data is still the raw data, and you can reverse this either in camera using the in-camera RAW processing mode or in post just by processing it as a color image. Now, finally, there are 3 user-defined picture styles, and these can be created in camera using any of the basic styles as a starting point. So that would be standard, landscape, portrait, neutral, faithful, or monochrome. Now, you can, of course, tweak those basic picture styles and in their detail settings and use them that way. But these user-defined modes allow you to have multiple tweaked versions using the same base style, but say for different conditions. A good example of this might be with the monochrome style. So you might have the monochrome style, the base one, set to use no filtering, and then have a user 1 custom style set up to start with the monochrome picture style and then have a red filter applied to it to give you really dark skies. Now, the other use for user-defined picture styles is for a completely custom style. These are created on your computer using Canon's Picture Style Editor software and then uploaded to your camera where they can be used. Now, doing this allows you to adjust not only the normal picture style settings, such as sharpening and saturation and so forth, but even how colors are actually rendered. You can be very selective in how this all works. Now, I will talk about Canon's custom picture styles in a future video, the last one in this series, so I'm not going to make too much talk about that there, but we will get into that at some point. So that covers the Canon provided picture styles, at least the ones that are by default in your camera, and what they will do to your images in terms of how they affect color and rendering. Next time, we're going to look at how to change the picture style or which style is selected on your camera. And in future videos, as I said at the beginning, we will talk about more picture style stuff, how to tweak them, and so forth. That said, I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.